nobody knows what Donald Trump is going to be because he's so unstable. And so I think he's mentally imbalanced. And he's so driven by personal grievance and vendetta and ego insecurities. I mean, Hillary Clinton is, I think, a sociopathic an evil person who's going to kill huge numbers of innocent people for her own opportunistic political gain.
How can it be that the two, you almost said it, like the two most hated politicians in the United States are actually the two candidates for president? How the fuck can that be?
When political culture and the kind of fabric of a nation gets really fucked up, the political process ends up fucked up too. If you talk to his supporters, they know that he says outrageous, disgusting things, that he's kind of unstable, that he has been, in a lot of ways a joke and a clown. That's what they like about it, because they want to burn the political system down.
Is she the lesser of two evils? Right?
Yeah.
All right, Jung Naiv, are we in Rio?
We are in Rio.
Can you call it Rio?
You have to call it Rio.
Glenn, you're back. First, I'm mad at you because you didn't tell me about Snowden, because our domestic spy agency boss, Mr. Maaßen, he revealed that Snowden is a Russian spy. Why didn't you tell us?
Oh, did I forget to mention that in the last interview we did? It just must have slipped my mind. It's interesting. Russia is so important for the West and has been for so many decades. If you want to demonize anybody, the quickest way is just to claim that they are covert agents of the Kremlin. So this is something that obviously was done in the U.S. The UK tried to do it through the Sunday Times by whispering to their little puppet at the Sunday Times that Russia had been given or had obtained the entire Snowden archive with zero evidence, and now the Germans are doing it well. So it's just a very well-worn propagandistic tactic in the West to try and take someone that you want to demonize and just claim with zero evidence that they're actually agents of the Russians.
Can you explain why they tried to demonize him?
Because he exposed secrets that they wanted to hide from the public that reflect very poorly on them in terms of how they're turning the internet into a realm of mass surveillance. So this was important to them to keep secret. They went through huge numbers of steps in order to conceal it from the public in a democracy, and Snowden single-handedly prevented them from doing that. And he's since become this important voice in defense of one of the things they hate the most, which is privacy in the digital age. So they regard him as an enemy, and the way that you smear your enemy is by claiming they're a Russian agent.
Do you still talk to him?
I do, yeah. I talk to him quite a bit.
How is he doing?
He's great. I mean, if you had told me, when we were in Hong Kong in 2013, or even when, we were talking in Berlin, I guess in 2014, that he would end up having this very stable life where he has become a prominent global voice in the debate that he helped to trigger, but also has been able to normalize his life to a great extent. He was on the board of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, which I founded with Lord Poitras and Dan Ellsberg. He's now probably one of the 2 or 3 most important people in that organization in terms of running it. He's developing new encryption technologies. He is on the speakers tour, appearing at all kinds of events, earning a living doing that.
In Russia?
Yeah, I mean, the events typically aren't in Russia. He's in Russia when he attends them via the internet in Europe and the U.S. So he's become, it's a limited life in the sense that he's not able to travel freely. But other than that, he's free, and compared to what we thought was going to be his ending, that's like it was almost. If you had told me that would be the ending, I wouldn't have believed it.
But is it the ending? Is he ever going to be able to come back to the US? I mean, he loves it.
I mean, I think that it's difficult to see how he would be able to come back to the US, because in order for him to come back to the US, the only way that he would come back is if it did not entail a significant amount of time being in a cage. why would somebody who's free willingly submit to, a decade of their life or more in a prison if they don't think they've done anything wrong? Almost nobody would do that voluntarily. And so the only way he can come back is if they agree to let him come back without prison time. And in order to do that, they would essentially have to let him come back to a hero's welcome. He would be able to march back into the U.S., not be convicted, no prison term, with huge numbers of people thinking he's a hero. And their big worry is that if he's able to do that, he will then inspire or motivate other people to follow that path, and that's what they're most worried about.
I mean, even in Germany, they kind of made it harder for people to whistleblow. I mean, they sanction it now even more. So.
It's obviously why, because essentially Western governments, largely in the name of terrorism and national security and ISIS and all of that, have gradually and inexorably increased their ability to hide from the public information about what they are doing with public power, with state authority. And there are very few avenues left for uncovering what it is that they're doing. One of the very few ways is for people that they admit into their circles and give access to this information to take it upon themselves to give that information to the public through journalists, through groups like WikiLeaks, or other forms of whistleblowing. And so if you are people who wield power obsessed with keeping what you're doing secret, one of the very few threats that you have to worry about is whistleblowers. And so, of course, that's who you're going to start to attack the most.
So does Edward have a job in Moscow, like a regular job, like 9 to 5 or something?
And he earns a living largely through giving speeches, attending events via video.
So let's leave the West behind. Let's focus on Brazil. Has there been like a coup or something here?
The problem with the word coup is that it's not a very precise word. It has no real specific meaning. It means different things to different people. It's just like terrorism, actually. One of the reasons why I don't like to use the word terrorism is because it's more just a term of art, propagandistic art. I think the same is true for a coup. Like, does a coup require having the military march into a presidential palace and removing the president at gunpoint? If so, that's not what has happened in Brazil. Can a coup be a kind of soft coup, abusing legal processes where factions that could never win an election exploit and abuse the law to remove a democratically elected president purely on pretext? If that can be a coup, then that is what has happened in Brazil. For me, the more interesting question is not does this word a coup apply, but is democracy the fundamentals of democracy being respected and honored, or are they being assaulted and attacked? And I think pretty clearly in Brazil, they're being assaulted and attacked. Whether you want to call that a coup or not, I think is a semantic issue.
Well, what happened? There was Dilma, right? And then suddenly there's Temer. What happened in between?
So a couple things. The most important fact to keep in mind when thinking about Brazil is that the Workers' Party, which is the center-left party of Dilma and then prior to her, Lula, has won 4 consecutive national elections, beginning in 2002 when Lula was first elected, and then 2006 when he was reelected, 2010 when Dilma was elected, and then 2014, only 18 months ago, when she was reelected. And so you have these factions that hate PT on the right and in the center, business factions, oligarchical factions, and elites who have been trying to defeat PT democratically at the ballot box for 16 years now and have continuously and repeatedly failed.
So they're opposition parties?
They're the opposition parties, the factions that regard PT as hostile to their agenda. They're PT, like so many parties that come into power with this sort of revolutionary spirit, ended up making huge amounts of compromises and even forming alliances with the very factions that they claimed so long to oppose, including billionaires and industry. So it's not quite as simplistic as this kind of PT versus the elite, but it's certainly the case that there's a large group in Brazil on the center and the right that has hated PT forever, could never beat them at the ballot box, and now sees this as an opportunity to finally take them out of power. The other important thing without having to win an election, the other important thing to remember is that, and I think this is one of the things that often gets lost in discussions of Brazil because it's kind of unique to Brazil, which is that other presidential countries of the president, an elected president with a defined term, have a process of impeachment, including the U.S. And of course, Bill Clinton was impeached by the lower house, but the Senate acquitted him. But in the case of, for example, Bill Clinton or any other U.S. president, or in France it's the case, in other places where they have a president, if you remove the president by impeachment, what usually happens is the vice president is of the same party, and so power doesn't shift, even if you take the president out of office. So if you impeach Barack Obama, Joe Biden would take over, both Democrats. If you had impeached Bill Clinton, Al Gore would have become president, both Democrats. So the ideology and the party that the people elect continues to remain in power. Here in Brazil, it's exactly the opposite. Because there's so many parties, there's, I think, 13 parties in Congress. It's in order to win a majority, you have to run with people from different parties. So in the case of Dilma, her vice president was a member of this kind of centrist, non-ideological party. They shift opportunistically from the left to the right based on where they can make the most money and gather the most power. That's the role they've played in Brazilian politics. So her vice president is from the centrist party, not at all part of the ideology that the people of Brazil elected 4 straight times. And in order to get rid of her and to make himself president, he and his party aligned with the members, the parties on the right that have lost continuously one election after the next. And so unlike impeachment in the U.S. or other European countries, impeachment here has not just resulted in the vice president replacing the president. It has resulted in the center-left party that has won all the elections being replaced by the center-right coalition dominated by this right-wing party that could never win an election in Brazil and hasn't won any elections in Brazil in a long, long time, and they are now suddenly in power. So you go to bed one night and you have this center-left party that's ruling the country that has won all the elections, and you wake up the next day with no election, and suddenly the right-wing party that Brazilians have rejected over and over dominates and rules and is having their agenda imposed. And, you know, is that a coup? Is it not a coup? You can argue that, but it's certainly not democracy.
So that vice presidential guy was Temer?
Temer, right, yeah.
But why was Rousseff impeached?
Well, I mean, the stated rationale, and I mean, I think this is really weird to American and European ears that you can impeach a president over this, is that she used a budgetary trick, which in Portuguese is called pedaladas, which means pedaling, like a bicycle, pedaling, whereby the government borrowed money from state banks in order to pay for parts of its budget. And then instead of paying it back as required by the loan agreement, she delayed the payments in order to make the economy look as though it was actually doing better than it really was. Like the government had less debt because essentially she took the money from the central banks, put it in the government, covered up the debt. This is budgetary tricks to make the economy look better than it really is something that literally every leader in every democratic country in the West uses. Pedalada specifically is used all throughout Europe. It's been used by prior Brazilian leaders. The idea that you would tear an elected president out of office over something like that is a joke. The only reason that they're able to remove her is because the economy in Brazil is suffering greatly, in large part due to the 2008 financial crisis that has now really started to injure and cripple developing countries. It took a while to get to the developing world, but now it has. And through bad decisions that she has made as well. So because the economy is suffering, she's unpopular. And this unpopularity is what is now allowing these opportunistic opposing factions to impeach her using the pretext of pedaladas, but in reality taking her out of office knowing the population won't really mind because they don't like Dilma because the economy is bad.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty stark, basically, what has happened. And just along the lines of democracy, I mean, the most amazing part about it is the vice president who is now the president. He's currently called the interim president. Within probably a week or 10 days, the Senate will vote to remove Dilma, and he'll be the actual president. He is wildly unpopular.
But I mean, like, how can the Senate or like the Parliament vote her out or impeach her? Like, if there's a majority of her party and all that.
Well, the thing is, there isn't a majority. Her party does. No one party has a majority because of how many parties there are. It's a mess. Okay. So no one party has a majority, and essentially what happened was this centrist party that Temer belongs to, that party I referred to earlier as this kind of non-ideological party. What happened was the head of the lower house in Brazil is a member of this party. It's the PSDB. And this party had been the party that had been in coalition with Dilma in the PT, which formed a majority. And the head of the lower house from this centrist party is named Eduardo Cunha, who's probably the single most corrupt politician in the entire Latin American region, if not the entire democratic world. He got caught with millions of dollars hidden away in Swiss bank accounts that are the direct result of bribes. He lied to Congress. He swore he had no foreign bank accounts in his name or that he controlled, and then they found these Swiss bank accounts with millions and millions of dollars in them. His wife has gone on these lavish trips and bought all this expensive jewelry and clothes with these ill-gotten bribes. So he's an outright criminal. And there was a movement in the House to remove him from his position. And for a long time, Dilma's party did not support it. And then finally, they decided the corruption had become so blatant that they couldn't block the Ethics Commission from going forward any longer. And when they voted for the ethics investigation into this head of the lower house, his vengeance was, okay, now I'm going to allow your impeachment to proceed. His party, the BSDB, abandoned her and became supporters of impeachment through this kind of process of vengeance. He has now been removed from his position as head of the lower house, but he's still a member of Congress. They haven't removed him. So in case you have any belief at all that the impeachment against Dilma is motivated by anger over corruption, just realize that the guy who got caught with millions of dollars in actual bribes in Swiss bank accounts is still a member of Congress, which means that he still has all the protections against prosecution. As is well known, the people who voted in favor of Dilma's impeachment, 2/3 of them have their own criminal investigations pending for personal bribery, things she's never been accused of. So the people who impeached Dilma are the actual corrupt criminals, and they are now the ones who have become empowered by virtue of this anti-democratic assault that was carried out in the name of combating corruption.
So what can Dilma do? What does she do?
I mean, the problem here is that the reason why they've gotten away with it is because the people who voted for PT, who have been PT supporters for decades, haven't gone to the streets and haven't protested in any way that would scare the elites. There's been some protest and some outbreaks of disruption, but by and large, they haven't gone to the streets for her for a couple reasons. To begin with, it was really Lula who built the Workers' Party, and he's this incredibly charismatic politician who, came from a really poor family, who was a union leader. He was illiterate until he was 10. He was one of the very first people from the lower classes to rise to power, and he was beloved by most of the people in this country, especially the poor who he purported to represent. And so the connection between them and him is very powerful and strong. If they tried to do anything to him, like put him in prison, there probably would be serious disruptions, if not riots. Dilma, on the other hand, was kind of this obscure, lifelong technocrat who has zero charisma and zero political skill. And she was kind of yanked from obscurity by Lula when his 2 terms were over. He wanted to show that he could pick the next president. Right. He was so popular that he could pick even this woman who, in a country that has been very patriarchal, that has never elected a woman president, who nobody knew, who really didn't have any political skills, whose reputation was just sort of as a competent technocratic operator. And he got her elected. But she never had any real connection to the people. She's not a natural politician. It's a little bit like Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, the way he's such a natural politician and she isn't, and he inspires this kind of excitement and love among a lot of people, and she doesn't. But it's even more extreme because Dilma really has problems with political relationships and communicating. She built no support in Congress. So she had no political base to appeal to defend her. On top of which, people are really suffering here. The economy is in a very deep and hurtful recession. And people don't really feel moved, even those who are against impeachment, to go to the streets to defend a government that they feel has so profoundly let them down. And so the oligarchs here and the media barons and the conservatives assess accurately, as it turns out, that they could seize power undemocratically. And because it was Dilma that they were pushing out of office, they felt they could get away with it without too much upheaval. And so far, that's been accurate.
So now Temer's going to probably become the official president, right? Now is he interim?
Yeah, so now he's interim president. Once the Senate, so the House has already voted to impeach Dilma, to send the charges to the Senate, which then tries her on these charges. And if it convicts her, as it almost certainly will, she's then permanently removed from office, at which time he becomes the full-fledged president.
Well, I mean, you said he's not ideological, so maybe he could be a good guy. Do we know stuff about him?
Well, he is now dependent upon the right wing in order to form congressional majorities. He relied on them to impeach Dilma and install him as president. His party, although they're not ideological, they're centrists. So they're very close to business. That's what they really are about. Is they have more money than any other party by far because they raise huge amounts of money from the business interests they serve. So although they're not ideological in the sense of being on the left and being socialist, or being on the right and being, hardcore uber nationalists or whatever, they're not ideologically extremist in that sense. They're transactional. They get along very well with the oligarchs and the business interests that dominate Brazil. You can call that an ideology, or you can just call it, being soulless and transactional. But whatever you want to call it, they're very devoted to that group of people. And so their agenda are exactly the ones that international hedge funds and bond markets and foreign capital and oligarchs here in Brazil are craving. Austerity, cutting social programs, keeping taxes low, and doing these neoliberal reforms that the international market wants to see. That's their goal. And then the foreign policy is to terminate what had been Brazil's primary alliances, namely BRICS and Mercosul, this kind of regional alliance with other Latin American countries, and emphasize what they're calling bilateral relationships, which is really meaning we want to move back closer to the U.S., the way all right-wing governments do.
So BRICS is going to be over?
Not sure if it's going to be over, as in just abolished, but it's certainly being vastly deprioritized. The right wing and the business interests in Brazil see their economic interests as being served far more by being subservient to the U.S. and to Wall Street and to international capital than they see it as working in tandem to build a regional powerhouse in Latin America, or working with Russia and China and Korea to build a new kind of hegemonic competitor to the U.S.
So has Temer done anything so far as interim president?
I mean, right now he's trying just not to make any waves so that he doesn't jeopardize his empowerment. He's actually done a very poor job at that. He sort of notoriously unveiled his cabinet of 23 ministers, all of whom literally were white males. In a country that was impeaching its only female president ever, that is more than 50% non-white, every one of his 23 ministers were white males, which caused a major controversy, not just here in Brazil, but throughout the West, which was offended by that. Of the 23 ministers, 3 of them, including probably his closest ally in Brasilia, had to quit within the first 30 days because of their getting caught in corruption scandals, including one of whom who was caught on tape plotting to put an end to the ongoing corruption investigations by impeaching Dilma. So he got off to a very rocky start, to put that mildly. So he hasn't started to do things yet that are going to be wildly unpopular, such as cutting really beloved social programs that have lifted millions of people out of poverty. But very few people doubt that that's their ultimate intention.
So it doesn't sound like the poor are going to be served under that new cabinet and all that.
Well, there's a reason why the poor in Brazil have voted overwhelmingly against the very people who are now in power, and that's because they know that.
Mm-hmm. So Brazil had their first female president. Looks like it's going to be the U.S.'s turn now. Mm-hmm. What do you make of the whole shit show in America? Like we cover it on our show. We basically call it the greatest reality show in the world. Is it a reality show?
Oh, it's total reality TV. Reality TV succeeded because people are able to watch TV and form connections based on either love or hate with various characters. So the reason why people watch reality TV is because there are villains that they love to hate and root for to be voted off an island or out of a house or off the show. And then there are people that they kind of come to love on a personal level, like they admire, they connect to for some reason, and they root for them to succeed because of personal characteristics that they admire. So if you're a political consultant running a political campaign, especially for president, you know that those personal connections, seeing these politicians as celebrities or villains that you love or hate, way more powerful than ideological appeals or policy papers or anything like that. And so the focus of the campaigns is very much on building up these people as celebrities. And then for the political media, it's much more interesting, it's much easier, it's much more appealing to cover it like entertainment, like reality TV. So, when Barack Obama ran, that's one of the things he did so brilliantly was, he built this personal brand. And one of the things that's most fascinating is in 2009, the advertising industry gave out awards, and one of their top awards for best branding campaign went to the Obama campaign because they understood what they were doing. So it's fascinating because Hillary Clinton is widely disliked by the public.
She's the villain?
Well, fortunately for her, she's running against the only person who in the last 50 years is even more unpopular than her, which is Donald Trump. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are each other's best hope. The only chance that someone like him would have to win is running against someone like her, and the only chance she has of winning is running against somebody like him. So you have the two most unpopular political candidates in the last 40 to 50 years. They've been famous for decades. Their opinions of them are formed. So the only chance that either of them has is to demonize the other one on a personal level to such an extent that you just turn them into this scary villain so that people, even though they can't stand Clinton or can't stand Trump, will nonetheless vote for them in response to fear of the other. And so that's what this campaign is. It's just an attempt to turn the other one into a reality TV show villain so that people want to vote them off the island.
So, I mean, what Germans don't understand, like, how can it be that the two, you almost said it, like, the two most hated politicians in the United States are actually the two candidates for president? How the fuck can that be? When
political culture and the kind of fabric of a nation gets really fucked up, the political process ends up fucked up too. I mean, you just saw that in the UK where, decades of globalization and integration into Europe has left this huge part of the country, primarily the working class, utterly hopeless and angry because they got completely ignored and left behind by this media class that's really homogenized, that's based in London and then in Brussels, that never talks about them or understands them or cares about them in any way. And so even though Brexit was, by all rational perspectives, an irrational thing to do. No matter who you are in British society, you're probably going to end up worse off if you have your country tear itself away from the EU. So many people were so angry that they didn't care about that rational debate. And they were just so furious at the nation's elite that the more they told them not to do it, the more they wanted to do it. So in the US, you see a very similar thing in terms of Trump. If you talk to his supporters, they know that he says outrageous, disgusting things, that he's kind of unstable, that he has been, in a lot of ways a joke and a clown. That's what they like about it, because they want to burn the political system down. And that's what accounts for a large amount of his support, is this kind of just intense anger over the sense that elections no longer matter and that you have to blow up the entire edifice in order to get some better outcome. Clinton's support is explainable a lot by the very valid and genuine excitement over electing the first woman president after 230 years of men occupying the White House and dominating all aspects of political economic life. That's an important milestone. Not just women, but a lot of men are excited by that, the way that they were excited by electing the first African-American president in Obama, in a country where African-Americans have just as bad, if not a worse history. So there's a lot of willingness to overlook all of Hillary Clinton's massive political, ideological, and ethical flaws in pursuit of this social milestone. And then on top of that, people are, for valid reasons, petrified of Trump. And for better or for worse, Hillary Clinton is the only alternative. And she became the only alternative because the thing that matters most in American politics is money and institutional power. And the Clintons are bad at a lot of things, but one of the things they're better at than anybody else is amassing huge amounts of money and institutional power. They know how to play the political game, and so they played it, and they played it well. And so she positioned herself as the only alternative to Trump, and will probably win because of that.
Is she the lesser of two evils?
I mean, I don't think that you can have somebody. The reason why that's hard to answer is because nobody knows what Donald Trump is going to be, right, because he's so unstable. And so I think he's mentally imbalanced. And he's so driven by personal grievance and vendetta and ego insecurities that his decisions and his behaviors are totally unpredictable, because they're the result not of any cogent worldview, but the result of whatever petty, small drive happens to emerge on any given day that personally affects him.
So you don't think it's an act?
No, I think he's genuinely emotionally unstable, and I think he's become more psychologically unhinged as the kind of pressure and the criticism has intensified. And then there's other parts of his candidacy that are legitimately terrifying, in like unique ways, just like the forces that he unleashes, the sentiments that he gives license to express, the way in which he's become this galvanizing force for all kinds of bigotry and racism, things that are always lurking in the American culture but have been more or less suppressed, that he's bringing to the fore and allowing organizing around. Hillary Clinton is, I think, a sociopathic and evil person who's going to kill huge numbers of innocent people for her own opportunistic political gain. She's going to implement all kinds of neoliberal policies that will serve her donor class and the billionaires that love and adore her. She'll probably be far more aggressive militarily than even Obama, who has bombed 7 predominantly Muslim countries in the last 8 years. But there are really unique dangers that Trump poses that the ordinary sociopathic American political villain like Hillary Clinton doesn't quite get to.
I mean, there's Clinton, who we know what she's done over the last 10, 20 years. Yeah. I mean, she's voted for the Iraq War. She's got the U.S. into Libya and all that. We know what she's done. And with Trump, you can only project what he could do or what we think he would do. So
right. But the problem is I mean, yes, exactly.
Doesn't experience beat, truthiness?
Well, I mean, that's the problem, right? Is that you don't, like I said, you don't actually know what Trump will do. But there's certain things that he said he's going to do that are just unthinkably evil, like deporting 11 million people who are in the United States without legal authority. Just the amount of tyranny and authoritarianism by itself that would require is unthinkable. Or banning Muslims from entering the United States, the kind of just like demonizing policy of pure bigotry that almost nothing could justify supporting. So, and so no matter how much, he does come from this identifiable ideological tradition that actually does raise questions and challenges to the status quo orthodoxy that Hillary Clinton represents that need challenging and questioning. It's more nativist and isolationist, which in one way manifests in all kinds of terrible ways, but in other ways questions the amount of military intervention and domination that the United States engages in around the world. Questioning NATO is a really important debate to have. And there's other, components of that worldview that have something to offer to the political debate. The problem is that the vehicle for those views is so radically dangerous that you can't find any value in it at all.
So let's say Trump makes it. Who knows why and when, how, but he makes it. I mean, the American president is not a king. He's not all powerful. So, I mean, when the United States were founded, there was a reason that the president can do only certain things. So, are people exaggerating his potential power?
So, well, first of all, theoretically, you're right. The president is supposed to be this very kind of limited office, precisely because the founders wanted to avoid, more than anything else, replicating the abuses of a monarch that they had just liberated themselves from with this really dangerous and difficult war. Mm-hmm. So they devised all these limitations that were supposed to be imposed on presidential authority and power, in theory, right? You have Congress, and you have courts, and you have the media, and you have the public, and all these things. But in the last 6 decades, since the end of World War II, really, as the U.S. became not really a republic, but an empire, you need, in order to run an empire, a centralized emperor, somebody who really can operate without many constraints. You can't run an empire and have, all kinds of limitations on the president. So after World War II, through the Cold War, and then particularly after 9/11, in the name of terrorism, the president has become increasingly more powerful. For example, Obama has just started military involvement in Libya. No congressional debate, no congressional authorization, no process at all. All the bombing campaigns that Obama has done in Yemen, in Waziristan, in Somalia, none of that is authorized by Congress. It's just the president ordering the military to do it. And even on the domestic front, Congress doesn't have much of an interest in legislating. They're happy to cede authority to the president. So that's one thing, is just the office has become way more powerful and has way fewer constraints than it ever was intended to have and than it ever did before. Secondly, if you get a kind of person in office who's devoted to freeing the office of even whatever remaining constraints it has, you can certainly do that. I mean, Dick Cheney, for example, for decades was obsessed with the idea that the president is more powerful than what people generally think it should be. And so he's been devoting himself to creating theories to increase presidential power long before he ever got into office. Once 9/11 happened and he was vice president, they implemented a ton of those theories to completely liberate the president so he could start imprisoning people without trial, ordering the military all over the world, declaring certain laws to be invalid that Congress had passed in terms of how people are spied on. So if you have somebody who's just like a megalomaniac or an authoritarian who devotes himself even further to empowering that office, that could be really dangerous. And then you have this other side of the equation that's actually kind of scary too, which is, right now, all elite factions pretty much in Washington are united against Trump, including the ones that generally stay out of elections or support a Republican candidate, including CIA officials and defense officials who have, almost said, like, look, we would do some sort of coup if Donald Trump got elected. If he ordered us to engage in kind of torture techniques, we would refuse to do it. There's been calls to deny Trump the access to classified information that presidential nominees are typically entitled to get. This sort of idea that, even if the people make the mistake of electing Donald Trump as president, we now want generals and the CIA and other factions to just actively oppose and refuse to follow civilian orders. And you could start to have that kind of a reaction as well, almost like a coup-like reaction. Heike. So that's the other danger, is you either have no resistance to him or you have the kind of resistance that can really start to eat away at civilian control.
I mean, let's stick with the assumption that the people vote for him, like he gets the majority of the votes in November. That doesn't automatically mean he's becoming president, because there's an electoral college, right? Couldn't they, because they're like, how many people?
So this is exactly what I was saying, right? Like, people are talking this way. So
it's amazing, but
so you have, the electoral college was intended to be early on this kind of bulwark against democracy, because the founders of the country were largely rich white male property owners. Not largely, I mean exclusively rich white male property owners. Hold on one second. Let's just Heike! Come here. They've been gloriously quiet, so this is our first outbreak.
it's fine.
Were they nice to you when you came in? Yeah. Were they nice to you? Hold on one second.
It's a monkey. I guess there are certain ways. There are certain ways how to get rid of the monkey, I guess.
Well, you feed the monkey and then you spray the dogs with water. So anyway, like the kind of thing that you were just talking about illustrates the point I was making, because the Electoral College originally was intended to be this kind of buffer zone against democracy. Like, the founders were, rich white male property owners, and they were worried that democracy was going to run wild, that people were going to make bad choices, and they wanted a way to protect against that. So they didn't say, let's have the people elect the president. They said, let's have the people elect the Electoral College, which will then make the choice about who the president should be. So this framework has eroded over time as people have become more supportive of the idea of democracy. And now the Electoral College is largely regarded as a formality. So whoever the people vote for, the Electoral College is more or less required to ratify, so that the people are actually choosing.
Has the Electoral College always...
for a long time, for a long time. So now people are saying things like what you just said, which is, well, maybe we should not have the people decide. Maybe we should let if they make the wrong choice, let's let the Electoral College come in and save us from democracy. Or if Trump does get into office and issues an order, let's have the CIA or the military defy that order and refuse to follow orders. So now you're talking about unraveling the fundamentals of how the American government is created in order to protect against Trump, which itself the solution there might be much more dangerous than Trump himself. I mean, I personally don't want the CIA and the military making decisions about when to follow civilian orders and when to defy them, because then they become more powerful than the elected representatives, and that's when you start to really have democracy imperiled. So I worry with a Trump victory as much about him running wild as I do the fact that these kind of ideas that people have for how he can be stopped would start to create more problems than they're trying to solve.
So when I watch American mainstream media, German media, they kind of treat Trump like as the problem of the whole democratic system and not like as a symptom. Is he the personified problem? And if he goes away, I mean, if he loses and he goes away, will everything be fine? And in 2020 there will be normal presidential elections again?
Well, first of all, this is one of the problems with the Trump candidacy is you have basically there's two types of political identity. There's no more Republican versus Democrat or conservative versus liberal or right versus left or capitalist versus socialist anymore. You have like your political identity is defined by Donald Trump now. So you're either pro-Trump or anti-Trump.
I mean, if you say the entire elite is behind Hillary Clinton, doesn't that mean the Democrats and the Republicans, like the elite Democrats and Republicans, are behind Clinton?
Right. Well, that's the problem. Or they're at least opposed to Trump.
Right.
So, if you look at social media, hold on one second. What's this?
Another monkey.
Haika, come here. Come here. Come. Go inside.
There are like 3 dogs in here. Oh, another monkey.
You know?
Heika's the troublemaker, huh?
She's a troublemaker. She's a little neurotic.
We're almost done.
Yeah. So if you look at social media like Facebook and Twitter, prior to this election, essentially the way that journalists would use those social media platforms is that they would go to war against other journalists or other political operatives who are on the other side. So conservatives would fight with liberals, Democrats would fight with Republicans. That was how the political divide was defined. Now, if you look at Facebook and Twitter, you essentially have journalists and political operatives from across the political spectrum in both parties of both ideologies sitting on Twitter harmoniously embracing one another in opposition to Trump. So there's no elite divide when it comes to the election. A lot of Republicans and conservatives haven't taken that last step of saying I'm endorsing Hillary Clinton, although some have, but they're all by and large opposed to Trump with, the exception of a kind of, just like with Brexit where the elites were opposed to Brexit except for this kind of Murdoch tabloid right. There's sort of like a part of Fox News and a part of the far right that's behind Trump, but most of the right on the elite level are keeping a huge distance from him. Right. And so you have like one of the groups that is most opposed to Trump that hates him the most are neocons. The people who formed a big part of the Bush-Cheney administration, who brought us the war in Iraq, who were the architects of the war on terror, and who became wildly discredited as a result. They hate Trump because Trump made some early rumblings about not supporting Israel. He is viewed as being less belligerent toward Russia, which is a big bugaboo of the neocons, which is hostility toward Russia, and just generally threatening the entire kind of military-industrial order, which neocons are petrified of. And so they hate him more than anything. And so because they hate Trump so much and have become really active and vocal opponents of Trump, they have been embraced, again, by Democrats and even liberals as allies. And so you have this realignment, this reshuffling of the political factions in the U.S., where opposition to Trump is basically the admission ticket back into respectability and institutional affection that's going to endure long after this election, because all of these people have been brought back into respectability and prominence in a way that will allow them to continue to exert lots of influence once Hillary wins.
But back to the question, what is Trump a symptom of?
Well, I think, like we were talking about earlier, the best analogy, in my view, is Brexit. There have been, over the last 30 years, there have been really radical changes in how American society is structured, largely due to globalization. So the U.S. no longer is really this kind of country unto itself. It has become part of the global order. And Whereas, 50 years ago, you had things called American corporations that did manufacturing in the U.S. and created jobs in the U.S. and were identifiable as American. Now you have what are called multinational corporations with very little allegiance to any specific country. So if an American company, so-called, like Ford or steel manufacturers that have provided the backbone of the American middle class forever, can move to Korea or China or Mexico and create factories there at a much lower cost in terms of standard of living and wages. They do that in a heartbeat, and it has completely gutted the American way of life, the core of American industry and the American middle class. And so and then through free trade that has accelerated the problem. Global elites barely have any national identity. I mean, the billionaire class doesn't see themselves as citizens of any one country. They see themselves as sort of this transnational Davos crowd of where they have far more in common with on a class basis than they do nationalism. And so there's a huge number of Americans, millions and millions and millions and millions, whose economic security and stability have been completely gutted by these trends of the last 30 years. And these trends are not Democratic or Republican trends. They're just bipartisan status quo trends. And they have zero economic security. They have no health insurance. They have no jobs. Their kids go to really shitty public schools. If they do go to college, which is really difficult anyway, they end up buried in massive amounts of debt and then shitty jobs that earn no money where that debt can be paid off. Their prospects for their future are very dim. The American dream of having your child live a better life than you has been almost completely obliterated for all but a small fraction of people. And those people are extremely angry because they know they've been fundamentally fucked. And they've been fucked equally by Republicans and by Democrats, neither of whom care in any way about them. And if and then the only time they're talked about is in this very patronizing, condescending tone as being primitive or racist or just the people who essentially deserve to be left behind by, the media class that lives very far away from them in D.C. and New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles. And so when you get this message for decades that your welfare is going to be sacrificed, that you don't matter, that the people who wield power in both parties have nothing but scorn for you and they think about you at all, you are going to finally react with such anger towards the system that you believe has done this to you. And your desire is going to be not to reform it, not to work within it, but to blow it up. Not sure if what's going to replace it is better, but based on the view that it can't be much worse. That's why so many people voted for Brexit, in the hope that by blowing up the system, they will get something better without any guarantee that they will. And that's why people want to send Donald Trump to burn the entire thing down. And the angrier that media and political elites get about Trump and his supporters, the more satisfied they feel. And elites don't realize the extent to which they're held in such contempt because they don't want to face responsibility, their own responsibility for what they've done to people. And so the more that support Trump got, the more they just kept demonizing the people supporting him, which in turn fed the resentment and anger that caused Trump's support. So it's been this feedback cycle. And a lot of it is just pure racism. Happy to have a candidate railing against blacks or Muslims or Latinos or immigrants or whatever. But a big part of it is just full-scale alienation from this political system that has stopped caring about them at all.
In Germany, there's the term Lügenpresse, which means lying press, the lying press. That kind of sounds like it could be used, of course, in a different term in America too. Like there's the elite press, and they.
Yeah, I mean, there's this writer and TV host Chris Hayes who wrote this book in 2011 called Twilight of the Elites. And it's basically about the collapse of elite authority, which is really dangerous. And I mean, if you look at the two most significant...
Dangerous to the elite or...
Well, dangerous to any country. If you have a complete loss of faith in the institutions of authority, you're going to get a lot of disorder and anger and a refusal to vest any kind of credibility in authority. Now, it could be a good thing if authority is corrupt and deserves it, but no matter what, it's going to be a little scary because once you have the unraveling of institutions and authority, you never know what comes next. And the two most significant events in the U.S. over the past 15 years were the invasion of Iraq, based on what turned out to be full-scale lies, with the support of almost every media institution and the leadership of both political parties, and the amount of credibility that destroyed once people realized that they had been misled is incalculable. And then the 2008 financial crisis, brought about by economic policies supported by all financial elites and the leadership of both political parties, that have caused great economic suffering. So when you have that level of failure and ineptitude and deceit that has harmed millions and millions of people, you're going to have a loss of faith in institutions. And if you have a loss of faith in institutions, people tune out when there are people on television telling them that Donald Trump is dishonest or dangerous, because they no longer trust the voices that have been deemed authoritative. And then they start making their own choices. And that's essentially what's been happening.
And last question, isn't it kind of ironic that they didn't vote for Bernie Sanders? Or like...
I mean,
Bernie is coming from the other aisle, the other side.
Yeah.
He's addressing the same problems, many problems Trump is addressing.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, Bernie's way more people voted for Bernie Sanders than anybody thought was possible when he decided he would run. When he decided he was going to run, people treated it as a joke, just like this cute old man, this like socialist who was going to say some nice things and then pull out after a couple months and endorse Hillary Clinton. Right. And the fact that he beat her in state after state and exposed her as this very weak and unpopular candidate, notwithstanding the fact that she won, was kind of the first sign, the first canary singing in the mine of how much the political process and what people's expectations were starting to unravel. Because you couldn't have more institutional support than, literally almost every elected official in the Democratic Party supported Hillary Clinton. She had more money behind her than any political candidate in modern history. She comes from a family that is probably the most influential and powerful in the United States, because her husband was the president for 8 years and now runs a foundation that literally has raised billions of dollars from the most powerful oligarchs and tyrannies around the world. So she had every single conceivable advantage and still proved vulnerable to this 74-year-old, divorced Jewish socialist from one of the smallest states in the country. And so, I think that his success was also a byproduct, especially among young people, which formed the base of his support, for how angry and disenchanted and dissatisfied people are with the status quo and their refusal to accept the kind of consummate status quo guardian, which is what Hillary Clinton is.
Glenn, thanks so much.
Great to talk to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.